Welcome to Lead for Clarity. I'm Melanie Montgomery, and I'm here with Alan Anderson. We're from the Shandel Group, where we help you, your team, and your organization get to your next level. And today we're going to do a special episode of a behind the scenes of our team, where Alan and I talk a little bit about how we use our own tools in order to facilitate the best conversations between us.
Thank you for letting me join, Melanie. I am stoked. And maybe just out of the gate, I could break the rules a little bit and kick it back to you and say, hey, why is it so important that we're even doing it behind the scenes and working to practice what we preach?
Yeah, definitely. So I want to start it off by when I first started here at Shandel Group, I remember the conversation that we had very clearly where you said, we are bringing you on board because we believe that you have the same values as us and you follow the same things as we do. And the expectation is that you do that day in and day out, 365 days a year. And I took that like to heart. And I was like, I have to be the best version of myself every day and try and push myself in all avenues because I want to be the best member of this team. And really, what we do is we embody our values. And not only do we teach leadership development, but we practice leadership development. There's nothing that we say or do or tell other people to do that we don't actively practice ourselves. And it's really awesome because we're on a very similar leadership journey as all of our clients that we're learning right alongside them.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I really appreciate that. My perspective was shown to be accurate when you joined the team, and out of the gate, you really worked to practice all those things. It wasn't as though there was a huge gap where we had to teach you why witty, our core values, wisdom, integrity, truthful, totally fun, and you-centered, or, essentially client-centric, why those are so important. That was just who you were. And obviously, one of the things you and I share is we were byproducts of Shandel's coaching and consulting previously. So, that's always extremely helpful. You get to have a little bit of an inside take. I'm curious today, as we get behind the scenes, maybe we could start with where I screwed up. And it wasn't a intentional, like, haha, I'm gonna screw up. But I didn't know that Shandel and I were wired so similarly that I really just didn't have too much atmospheric pressure pushing back on trying to move 100 miles an hour, those different things. Maybe we could just start with what you helped me see into. I think it was like within 90 days of us teaming up, you had to take a bold, brave step forward and basically pursue me, and help me align what I told you with practice. Is that cool if I put you on the spot?
Yeah. So just so everyone knows, Alan and I are very different in our communication style. He is very high D, high I, go, 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 moving really quickly. And I'm a little bit in the middle, but I'm a lot more reflective. I like to have a little bit more time to talk and really think through my thought processes. And just the way we communicate is very different. And one of the things that I had to work on in terms of really fitting these values was not necessarily how I showed up with a team, but how I showed up with myself. Because I had throughout my career, I typically leaned into adapting to everybody else instead of showing up 100% authentically. And so when you show up with one communication style, my normal reaction is I'll just meet you where you are, I'll be what you need. But that can get really taxing over time. And so one of the things that I was learning through Shandel Group was understanding my style, but understanding that if I want people to talk to me the way that I want to be talked to, I have to ask them for it. And that was the most challenging thing, was to come to you and say, you know what, Alan, I need something different from you. And that was so hard. But it paid off so much because it really improved our communication. And we have had a little bit of a rocky road in communication, just because we have such different styles and figuring out how to really get to that best place. And I feel like we've come so far and made so much progress that I hope everyone gets to make, as they learn each other and really figure out what do we need from each other in order to communicate in the best way.
It's interesting you saying that. And obviously this part is us dialoguing back and forth. And I think that's the beauty of behind the scenes of this isn't a take two or anything like that. So I guess I better not screw up. So we have to cut edit and all those things that we don't have time for. But we really do want to add a ton of value for those listening. What is special about you, Melanie, and what I strive for, what Shandel strives for, and Scott and Erica and all the team members? Fundamentally, the integrity of being authentic to who you are creates opportunity to have that hard conversation or conflict or clashing. And so it's actually a gift of grace, or it's actually evidence that we really are on the same page and that we really are doing what we said we would do when we all decided to team up, which is I'm going to show up authentically. And it's one thing to say that, and it's another thing to do it. And I think, unfortunately, there's so many organizations that conceptually show up in their mind authentically. And then when push comes to shove, or when they're in the boardroom together, or when they're in the field together, or when they're doing whatever together, and someone rubs them wrong, they just try to take it and they don't say, hey, can you adjust your style? And I think that's really what I heard you say the first time you approached me. And it was almost literally 2 or 3 months in. It was no more than 90 days in, but you said, I've been adapting, or at least this is what I heard you say. I've been adapting my style to meet your quick, go, verbally process, execute. And I thought, really? I didn't know that. I thought I'd slowed down significantly so that you could keep up. And so we eliminated guesswork and those things. I didn't know. And thankfully, when you invited me into that and said, hey, I've got an observation, I've been adapting, it'd be really helpful if we could take it down a notch. I think because we were practicing our core value of integrity and showing up authentically of who we are. We really did that. We then had to take it to the next step to be highlight when there's a rub, because I didn't know we didn't have a rub because you were adapting the whole time. And so here I am thinking, oh man, this was gold. And your brain is getting tired or fatigued because you're thorough, which takes a little bit more time to process. And you were the one graciously trying to adapt, but it actually became mutually beneficial when you said, hey, can you slow down so we can do it together?
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like our communication has just grown leaps and bounds, from different conversations of, hey, like, I don't really like this, or hey, can you give me this? And I want to highlight a conversation that we had. Goodness, it was probably a couple months ago now, where, I went into the conversation ready to have a hard conversation with you about how I need you to communicate and how I didn't always feel heard. And we were in the car for about an hour, and I'm just looking at you like, did you like read my mind? Like, I don't understand. You're doing everything that I was going to have a conversation with you about. You were listening, you were slowing down, you're asking questions. And I felt so heard by you in that moment. And when you then asked me, hey, did you notice the difference between how I am now and how I was like, yes, I did. But that really was such an eye-opening moment for me. Number one, that I was ready to have that hard conversation, and I was kind of excited about it, because we have had so many good conversations over that time and I say hard conversations because any conflict with me is hard. When I have to say
Same
anything,
here.
it's a challenge.
It's harder if it's me, Melanie.
Where it wouldn't have been hard because Alan, you are probably the best conflict negotiator I've ever interacted with, where I wish everybody would handle conflict like you do, because you hear me, you validate me, you tell me you heard, you reflect, you say, here's how I'm going to try to be better. And then you check in, and it's wonderful. And that reinforcement, that way of handling conflict is what's given me the courage to continue doing it, because it's helping us so much. And in that conversation, I remember thinking like, yes, I don't know what happened, but you are just being exactly what I need from you. And you are really making me feel heard. And I want to ask a little bit, dig into that, of what kind of helped that change, or what evoked that difference in you in how you're communicating with me.
Well, because we did get about 30 seconds before I jumped on the Zoom late and we hit record, or jumped on the recording. I wrote down what I realized that nobody ever told me before. And what I understood was I conceptually want to do a whole bunch of things, but conceptual understanding is very different than concrete application.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what's interesting, you asking that question, because I was going to say, and I'm refraining because I'm working to practice my skill. I'm sure I'll be exhausted by the end of this simple little conversation because I do need to slow my brain down. I do need to take a breath. I do need to do those things that don't necessarily feel fun for me. I'd rather just let's go. Um, Realistically, when I tell you I want to hear you and I want to know you and I want to see you, and you say that, and the whole team says that to one another, that's not a front. We actually want to do that, warts and all, right? And I think what shifted is two things. I'm very fortunate, and maybe this was good and probably good or bad isn't right, but maybe I got away with something early on when Shandel and I were really working diligently to build this firm and grow this firm. Having similar styles was helpful in certain ways, but I didn't really have to think too much ahead of time about showing up. And what you did was cause me to pause and think. And so I think what I don't want people to misunderstand is, number one, you got to really mean it. Like if you're going to say, I genuinely care for people, that means you have to actually show up and genuinely care for people. I think the second thing is when you then get to have that regular interaction with someone who has a different style than you, then I get a look at anytime, and I did this mentally in my mind, anytime you are frustrated with me. And because you're mature and you're a seasoned leader and you're a senior leader, I'm looking for cues, the nonverbals, and literally you being frustrated with me, air quotes here, was a nonverbal of like just taking a step back, taking a deep breath, trying to show up well. So it's not like you're like, I'm out of here. That never happened. It was literally the nonverbals I was looking for. And it caused me to be more prepared for meetings and more prepared of, and actually, by the way, it was like a 90-minute drive we had. I know it only felt like an hour to you, but here I'm thinking, what are we going to do for 90 minutes? And then that doesn't even include going back. But I think the idea is you help me get to practice my skill of taking conceptual understanding to concrete application. And so I think that's the second piece. I think the third that I want to just give you a shout out. And this probably isn't a great podcast other than for one another, telling each other how much we appreciate each other here. But my wife and I are wired opposite. You and Sarah are far more alike than I am. And so you actually helped me communicate better with Sarah. And that's after 18 years of marriage. And so she's had to put up with this nonsense. And if I would have met Shandel in March of 2009, just shy of our 5th year anniversary, I don't even know if we'd be married, because my brain has an answer for the question Sarah doesn't even know she's going to ask me. And Sarah's brain is extremely thorough. So I ask her what she wants to do for dinner. And she's like, I'll get back to you tomorrow. And I'm like, what? So, and that's hyperbolic. But I think what it really was is you got to see, we had that hard conversation early on. And we've been practicing. So we've now worked together for a year plus, you and I have. And I have been practicing diligently the last 3 quarters, the last, 9, 10 months of how do I show up? So now personally, I'm showing up more helpful. There's concrete application and I get to practice on Sarah. And then when you and I show up professionally, I get to show up. And so now what's really interesting is I get to feel good and valued and cared for because you're feeling valued and cared for, or Sarah feels valued and cared for. And I think that's one of the things that I'll tie all this back together is where you do have to first genuinely care. But when someone is willing to say, hey, flag on the field, I keep adapting my communication style to you, which really what we're saying is they're adapting their listening style to really work to hear you so they can turn around and respond, not react, but respond. That is extremely generous and kind so that they can hear you. And so it's actually better for me if you feel cared for because you will understand what I'm intending you to know. And so I think you really helped me personally and professionally. And all you did was say, hey, I'm adapting to your style. You're talking really fast. We're moving really fast. And sometimes we have to do that. but the house or the building is not always on fire. So you don't always have to do that. Does that make
Mm-hmm.
sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing that I find to be kind of interesting, Alan, is that I used to be a little bit more in the other camp of really trying to react really quickly all the time. And I think that actually came from me trying to adapt my more reflective nature because of my position. I wanted to make sure I had an answer when anyone asked me. And so it ended up being a lot of internal dialogue of thinking, what am I going to say next? What am I going to do? And that really hindered my communication. And when I was in school, I learned this concept, the difference between discussion and dialogue. And it really just
Mm.
changed the way that I viewed communication and the way that I showed up, really.
So can I ask real quick? Can
Yeah.
you define? So I hear two words that are starting with these. What do
Yeah.
those two words mean?
Yeah. So dialogue is a conversation where the entire intent of our conversation is to understand each other's viewpoint. So often when we're talking with someone, we're listening to respond instead of listening to understand. And we're looking at it through the lens of our perspective. So if you have a different opinion than I have, and you're telling me what it is, I'm looking at you, number one, to say, how am I going to tell him he's wrong? And
Mm.
number two, why is he wrong based off of what I think? And so my entire listening is based on my perspective, my feelings, and my response. When we really invest in a dialogue, we take that out of the picture. So we're really listening to understand, where my entire conversation is digging into what you think and what your viewpoint is and really understanding it,
Mm.
and not looking at it through my own perspective. So if you have an opinion, I'm asking you questions like, tell me more about this. How does it work with that? Give me more information. How would this work? Or what about this challenge? And where the entire point of the conversation is not to decide who's right or wrong or what's good or bad, but it's really understanding someone's viewpoint. So I'm really just trying to figure out what you think, what you feel, and what your side or what your opinion is. And then once we've had that dialogue and we have a really deep understanding of what we both think, then we can transition into the discussion phase where we try to figure out what's the best way to go,
Mm.
based on our mutual understanding, deep understanding of each other's points of view. How do we best move forward? And so often we skip that dialogue phase. And so when you're telling me your opinion, I'm not really that open to it because I'm over here thinking, how am I going to convince him that I'm right? Because my opinion is showing up as I'm listening. That's the lens I'm listening through.
When you talk about this is really helpful. Prior to you bringing this up, I hadn't heard this concept before. Um, and I think what we work to do as a firm, and I'm not saying other firms don't work to do, what I'm saying is we're superior. We're
Of
better than
course.
everybody and we know it. Our intent to really understand the situation and the scenario. I think what other firms can do at times is try and come up with sticky or interesting information, and then they just sound really brilliant and they're the most brilliant person in the room, but it's not necessarily applicable. So I'm really grateful I don't hear you saying that. What I do hear you saying though, and I want you to tell me if I'm zeroing in on the root issue here, as you are sharing dialogue discussion, the common denominator seems to be the desire for mutual understanding. So it's actually as important to the person who is in a dialogue for you to understand as it is for me to understand, and maybe even say be
Mhm.
understood. I want you to be understood too, because now I have a vested interest in both of us making more together, or it could be a team or an organization or whatever. But I hear you saying that there's a value to mutual understanding. Am I tracking with you?
Yeah, absolutely. We're really trying to both understand our viewpoints. And, as coaches, we're really trained to go in and ask good questions and really get to the root of the issue and really figure out how do we lead people in the best way.
Hmm.
And if we can apply that to our own conversations within our teams, that's where we really find the benefit, because a lot of times when we're coaching, or almost always when we're coaching people, we don't have a vested interest in which way they go. right? We don't have an opinion as to they should do this or that. We
Wait,
just
real quick.
want to do it.
Why is that? Why do we, and I guess I'm asking you a philosophical or a, existential or something, but why don't we have that? Why is that missing?
Well, I don't think it's a bad thing that it's missing. I think it's actually a great thing that it's missing because we're truly guiding people without trying to guide them in a specific direction. We're guiding them where they want to go and need to go, not where we want them to go. So, like, if I'm coaching you and you have a big decision to make, I don't have a personal interest in if you choose A or B. I just want you to make the best decision for you because that's my job as your coach. Whereas if I'm your leader, I have a vested decision on do you choose A or B. So as I coach you, I'm going to coach you towards what I want, not what's best for you, because my vested interest in the conversation is very different. It's not that I don't care about that leader, I don't want them to succeed or any of that, but their outcome is their outcome. I don't have any consequences to their choice. Whereas when you and I are having a conversation about what do we do with Shandel Group, you want one thing and I want another. I'm
Mm.
not going to guide you towards your best decision because that might be against what I want or what I think is best. So our communication differs a little bit when we have that interest because our lens changes. And so
Yeah.
we kind of, in that coaching moment, we really are getting that mutual understanding. We're getting the root. We're really truly digging into what they think and feel and how they want to move forward. That when we have that opinion or that desire, that consequence attached to it, we don't go in as open because we have that preconceived notion of what the outcome should be.
Mm. Man, that's really, really good. I have I have 2 pages of notes already. So this is really great. I'm curious from your perspective, I imagine as we start to wrap things up here, the idea of this behind the scenes, this idea of us working to practice all the things we preach.
Mhm.
What do you think is the call to action? What's the call to action for the listeners to say, I'm just going to take this one gem, or I'm just going to take this one and make it this one thing and make it my objective for practical application? What do you see as the call to action in this conversation today?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that if I could get people to do one thing as it relates to this conversation, I would ask that everyone really be cognizant of their internal dialogue as they're having a conversation and really check that voice in your head and really meet people where they are and try to gain that understanding of what they're saying and why they're saying it. Sometimes we don't articulate ourselves well. And so if we just hear the one sentence and move on, we're missing the entire intent of what they said. Really get into the intent, what they mean, and
Mm.
all that comes with it. So you are really empathetically and compassionately and openly listening to them. So you really truly have that understanding. And then move into your own thoughts and feelings because when we can do that, people feel really heard because we took the time to sit there and listen and really understand them. And so I would say that really, as we're looking at listening, listening is a skill that we can develop. It's not something that we inherently have or don't have. So I really want people to just focus on how do we improve our listening and how do we be present and be intentional in those conversations.
That's really, really good. And I think the only thing I would add to that, and maybe it's really what you're saying, is how do we make sure we're mindful to take what we conceptually understand up here and make it concrete application? Because it's no good, even though I told you, I mean, I think I probably told you this 2 or 3 times, that we want your family, your friends, your community to say you're a better person because the firm you work at is our firm, essentially, right? And that only happens realistically in reality if we take what we conceptually understand and make it concrete application so that you can feel it or I can feel it. And the cool thing is you made me a better husband and a better father because you were, I guess you had grace and grit to say, hey, can you slow down a little bit and work to meet me in the middle? And because of that, I slowed down. And even Sarah has said, like, oh, you're actually communicating better after 18 years of marriage. Like, I'm
That's awesome. I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, and as we land this plane, I really just want to say thank you, Alan. for being here today, but also for being such a great colleague, and someone that I can look up to and learn from and grow from, because working with you and Shandel and Scott and Erica over the last year and a half has really helped me to grow in so many ways, just because you were there supporting me and encouraging me to push myself and be myself, and tell you when something bothered me or when I needed something. And that was really what I needed to help me really lean into that vulnerability. And I'm so grateful for you and Shandel and the rest of the team for helping me grow. And really, just one of the things that I always say is that one of the best things about being an executive coach is having a team of executive coaches that coach me every day. I love it because our whole team is always trying to figure out how we can be better. And I don't think there's a job out there that would top this one, where we just get to learn and grow and help others learn and grow. It's amazing. And I'm really grateful for you. So before we land this plane, do you have any last thoughts or comments for our listeners?
I think I'll sum it up with obviously one of my favorite books is Extreme Ownership. So I'm going to leverage my buddy Leif. He made a quote that said, "It's not what you preach, it's what you tolerate." And I think that perfectly sums up everything we're talking here, that it's not so much not tolerating nonsense in somebody else or your team or your kids or your spouse or your partner or your neighbors. It's really first not tolerating anything less than the best. I think, unfortunately, that's probably an all too common of a lie. We say, "Oh, I'm doing my best." And it's like, no, you're not. You're mailing it in. Like, you're doing your best, 1 day or 2 days or 3 days a week, not like you said that we aspire to as a firm, 365 days a week. Wow, that's a lot. 365 days a year. To not tolerate anything other than what we know to be our best. And it's not perfection, it's progress, right? And I think at the end of the day, it's not what you preach, it's what you tolerate. And it starts with ourselves as leaders. So this was great. Thank you so much for letting me join you.
Yeah, thank you. And to our listeners, please make sure to like, subscribe, leave us a comment or a review. You can find us at shandelgroup.com. And as always, we ask that you be the best that you can be today. Bye-bye.